Hello, friends. Hi, I'm Malini and I am here with my astrology teacher, Sam Geppi. We are here today because we are going to be talking about Sam's course. He is relaunching his course, his level 1 and level 2 certifications. I've gone through 3 levels of astrology certifications with Sam. And the times are changing, the needs of people are changing, the way people are learning stuff is changing. And here we have Sam, who has done some introspection and figured out how people are learning and revamped his course. So I have Sam here who is going to talk about it. Sam, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Malini Iyer, amazing scientist and great astrologer. And yes, Malini went through my course, one of the first who went through. And, given that Malini had such a strong educational background as a doctor, as going through PhD programs and whatnot, I remember one of the earliest, I'd already been teaching for quite a while when you came to that. I think it was the first time you came to a retreat in San Francisco, and I was teaching about quantum physics, and I had no idea that you were going to be hearing me talk about that. I was developing this idea of bringing quantum physics in alignment with Vedic astrology, and I had just really been learning about the double slit experiment and things like that, and it was part of this whole way of mapping quantum physics and also neuroscience and the 3 gunas to the brains and all. I was really very much in this kind of thing. And as I was teaching the quantum physics, I was thinking to myself, man, am I way over my skis here? Like, I thought I really got it. And then Malini came up to me on one of the breaks and told me, she said, I went through and learned quantum physics as part of my PhD, and I didn't really understand it. And you just made it make sense. I was like, really? And I was like, boy, it was one of the most validating things because, just because conceptually, it was so fascinating. But anyway, that was one of the amazing stories that I felt validated, because here's someone who was in a PhD program, has graduated and is a doctor, and she's gone through these classes and heard these things taught at universities forever. And she came up and said, you made it make more sense.
Yeah, I think it was actually making quantum physics more
real,
more relatable in terms of spirituality and consciousness. And it wasn't a concept or an experiment in physics, but it was, and there are people who have done that too. But that's the first time I heard it in terms of astrology and in terms of how it connects to consciousness and how energies are manifesting. And I started to make those connections in my head, and I was like, okay, yeah, this really makes sense. And I think that's,
I was talking about how the wave collapses into a particle based on our attention, which is literally what quantum physics says, which makes absolutely no sense. It's bonkers that the double slit experiment, just observing protons going through a slit will then make them appear in a specific place in time. Whereas if you don't watch it, there's a pattern. It just makes no sense. But then you think of what consciousness and what awareness is. Mm-hmm. It literally is showing how the infinite possibilities of the wave become the particle once you focus on it. So it's like it's a mind-blowing concept.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's one of your attributes, Sam, that made me study with you. Because when I started studying astrology, I was really looking for answers that made sense. I have a very rational, logical left brain, also a really strong right brain. I'm an artist. But when you say things to me, it needs to make sense, because I would remember and I'll start to connect the dots in my head. And so I was doing my yoga teacher training at that point in time. I was also pursuing my PhD at that point in time. And I was trying to do a lot of things because I was very inclined towards spirituality. And I would hear these terms thrown out at these yoga teacher trainings, and they would discuss some yoga teacher's chart, and they would be like, oh, Saturn is in the 8th house in Aquarius, and the next day they'll be like, oh, Saturn is in the 7th house in Aquarius, and I would be like, how would it be the same thing? How would one sign be two different houses and all of that? And of course, people had not studied it in depth, and that's when I started to really look for somebody who broke it down in a way that is foundational. You can understand it, and then you can build on it. And growing up in the Indian system, it is important for me for things to make sense at a foundational level. And that level one course that I found, and I signed up right away, was one such thing. It was that very basic, very foundational. These are the things you need to do to learn astrology. And it is very simple. It is not, there's no complicated rule that you have to remember and apply. It's simple, basic, foundational stuff of how the sky is laid out, how your chart is laid out. There's a very specific way we look at the sky when you were born. This is what it is. These are what the nakshatras are. This is how the rulership of Raja Yogas are applied. These are how aspects are applied, because sometimes you hear people conflate Western aspects with how the Indian one-way aspects work. And all of that was explained and laid out in very simple, understandable, and digestible way. And I think that was the beauty of the course. It was not made as if it's unreachable. It's some esoteric, mystical thing that you will never get your head around it. It was always very foundational. And I think that's why I have been with you for so many years. And even the opportunities you have given me to teach, I've seen you over the years, you have not moved away from things that work. There are hundreds of rules that can be applied, but these are the things that work, fail proof in every single chart you apply. And you have done your research, you look at it. And that's as a scientific mind, that is what is important for me. It is something that can be reproduced in every single chart. In science, we talk about reproducibility of data. And if a data is not reproducible, it is not real, right? So if you pick a rule, if you pick a foundation, it needs to be repeatable in every single instance. And you cannot be like, oh, it worked in one chart and it did not work in one chart, and then you try to put excuses for that.
No, that's what got me started even teaching when because I started too, when I started learning in the early 2000s. Again, there were great teachers, and there's nothing they were saying wasn't wrong. It was from the text and all like that, but there was so much like, what is foundational? It's exactly the same thing. Like, I can't follow this rule because it's only working a little, like you're saying this now, but then I can see where it doesn't work in 5 charts. So this can't be scientific, or it's just a lot of aphorisms. I remember ones like, and it's always this kind of reduction of complex things into simple rules like good and bad. This is always the confusion. It's, as you know, because students will always have a confusion when they're trying to read at first. It's some confusion of, well, what do you do when there's this good thing and this bad thing? It's always this, well, first of all, one isn't good and one isn't bad. There's a judgment rather than a interpretation. And it's these rules, like you'll hear things like, well, planets do good in the 11th house, or this is that, or this, and you're smiling because you know how much I just love hearing that kind of stuff. I just but it's all you hear when you start trying to learn from most teachers. It's mostly, you just hear that you're inundated with it. And it's so much, and it makes sense here. They'll say it in this context, but then in another one, it doesn't work at all. So I saw the same things. And I just said, I'm just going to forget all that. Like, what are the principles that aren't going to change? And so I went back to my training, which was yoga and meditation and Vedic philosophy, what's called Sankhya philosophy, but it's the philosophy of yoga and whatnot. And when I look in the text directly, Brihat Parashara Sastra primarily, because that's the one that's complete, the whole book is really just it's an exposition of Sankhya philosophy with astrology plugged in. So it's like, oh, you have these gunas and these elements, these four purusharthas. You have things like dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Then you have other principles like speed and velocity and angularity and other just universal principles of proximity that just make sense in all areas of life. But then you can hang everything on those frameworks. That's why they're called really a framework now. Now you're dealing with a structure and a framework, just like in science. You have frameworks. You're not just trying to memorize some principle or some detail and then try to put them together later. The details, the truth or the veracity of details are going to come because they adhere to a framework, a logical system that obviously something is working all the time, like you said.
Yeah.
The things that are working are gunas, elements, these other kinds of things. And the planets and signs and houses and all, they hang on that framework. Now you have a structure. It's not just pulling on these ideas that you've heard that you're trying to remember. And a sign isn't just a bunch of ideas that, again, you're trying to memorize. There's a sensible, logical thing, like Libra is ruled by Venus. It's air. It's masculine. It's rajasic. It's, has this, it's quadruped. I'm sorry, it's biped. So it's, these are all things that you just now move around, and that forms a structure. So just like when you're doing science, you have principles and then you stack the principles. This is called part of what I developed called P5 system. And then you stack the principles. And then when you stack them, they create methods. When you start to stack a couple principles together, then you'll get a method. Then you apply the methodology. Again, the same one. So that's what I did, is went back and found these things. And then eventually, as you test them, you don't just believe in them because it's not a religion. You have to do it. And it'll reveal the truth once you practice it.
Yeah.
Then you're able to do it. And those universal principles work in all situations, like whether it's a natal chart, whether the planets by transit, all of these things, all the rules apply all the time. Yeah. And if the things you're doing don't apply in all situations, the principles and foundations don't apply in all situations, then they're not good rules. It's like anything else, like you just said with science. Then it's not, it might be a theory or a hypothesis or something, but it's not a foundational thing that you can build on.
Yeah, and I've noticed that, to your credit, your teaching style, you have not wavered that much from Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. You teach the way it is written there. And if people who have read Parashara or Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is the classical text of astrology, it's written very scientifically. It's not flowery. They've not like over exaggerated or brought in an idea. It's written very scientifically. And when you teach too, especially the level 1, the foundational course, it is scientific. This is the rule and this is how you apply, and you can see it apply across 5 different charts or 10 different charts. And
the difference is what you're describing. It's kind of like a math book where there's just formulas. Like, you don't need to have them interpreted. You do them. You apply a formula, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you start with that, this will show all the text because it's written. It just tells you things. Like, the difference between Parashara and other books is other books try to explain things and they interpret things. Parashara actually doesn't interpret anything. Nothing is interpreted. He just says, here's what it is. And if you can't interpret it, then you can't do it. So sorry, but then you can't do it. Yeah. And this is the difference. It's like a math book. It's like, here are the formulas, right? And by the way, that's very much the way like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is written. Again, this is how you can tell the difference, even like with rishis and whatnot, because he just says, yoga is this is that, this is that. He's not trying to explain that to you or trying to convince you or trying to do all of that. Other books are written like that, and there's things you can get from them. But again, in Parashara, it's just saying, this is that, the sun is this, moon is this, Leo is this, he's just telling you. Mm-hmm. And it's all inside that language. Leo is warrior caste, it's sattvic, it's this, it's that. If you don't know what that means, then you're lost. He's not going to say, and that means it's blah, blah, and that means, no, he doesn't say that. I'll say that. That's what I teach. I wind up interpreting what that stuff means because people don't understand what that means on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you take the truth and you go deeper into it.
Yeah.
This is the thing. This is why when you say I haven't wavered from the truth from the text, but my teachings are always changing because I'm always going deeper. That's why I can always teach. I could go back and teach a class I taught 5 years ago because I can always go deeper into it because it's endless depth. And so again, that's what it is with just like with science, it doesn't change principles. It's never going to not be gravity. It's never not going to be this or that, but you keep examining and going deeper into what those foundational principles have set up because you're going deeper, because you're growing, because you're having breakthroughs and insights. That's why when you learn Vedic astrology this way, particularly in alignment with these universal dharmic principles of yoga and of Sankhya philosophy, it's like an endless beginning because you're a work in progress. And because it's a foundation not just of astrology but of life, you keep getting more insights about the same teaching because you keep growing. And the astrology, you get more and more breakthroughs. I'm sure you've noticed this, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that within me for sure, because I've also gone on and then done courses on relationships, on Rahu Ketu, and then how you can see the whole genetic material, and like the whole cell and the genetic material is what the cosmos is about, how Rahu Ketu relates to that, how different planets relate to different organelles in the cell. So I've also gone ahead and deepened that through my own practice, but deepened that also through listening over the years. And I think listening is a really big quality in astrology that you need to cultivate. And it's a reflective listening, right? It's not listening for just information, it's reflective listening. And I think,
and I've also seen with you, I'm sorry, just real quick, about how even as someone from India who grew up immersed in the culture of all the holidays and whatnot, I'm just reflecting back because of Malini and I, we've taught these courses together, and the ones that, you've been the most excited about or as excited about is teaching on the holidays and the astrological, cosmological connections to the Indian holidays and the sacred, again, cosmology, even as someone who's from India, learning it this way, learning it systematically like this deepens that awareness, again, of everything in your life, because it's not just, oh, now I'm going to learn astrology. No, it's how everything is laid out, whether it's the DNA in the cell, which Malini has mapped all of the planetary forces and nodes to like DNA and all these things in her work, but also even just everything we take for granted, like the solstice and this holiday and, the whole time of like, Shivaratri and Diwali, like they're not just holidays, they're all based on astrological phenomena. And that's happening whether we know it or not.
Yeah, I do remember, like I grew up immersed in the Indian culture, and when I was growing up, I knew the significance of the holidays. I knew the stories associated with the holidays. And, the way Indian philosophy is taught, it's taught in many, many layers, and it's passed on through stories. And those stories were really alive in me. But I remember like two instances where you actually pointed out, especially for Mahashivratri and Diwali, how they were connected to, they had these astrological symbolisms built in it. And that's why we are celebrating it at that particular time. And
Guru Purnima, all of them.
Yeah. And as soon as you showed it to me, I could like start to see it. And I was like, wow, okay. So, and it is important, right? Like, because if you just look at the stars and the planets in the sky, you have no connection to them as objects. But when you have these stories built around them, and the rishis and the sages were very intelligent, very wise in knowing how to get us to connect to these energies. And so I knew the stories, but the actual science, which is the astrology behind it, yeah, I that was really phenomenal too. So that
yeah, and we don't realize, and again, we can say, oh, it's like mythology, symbology. On some level, that's for our convenience, but actually, again, we had this thing called the Lionsgate portal, which was August 8th, right? We're always looking for portals, not to not to minimize that, but every moment is a portal. But what is the portal? And so these holidays are actually aligning us with portal that's always going on. It's just at specific times they become very specific, but we can understand the holiday through the astrology and everything through it at that point. So again, the thing that people that I really try to convey first is that everybody can learn it, like you said. One of the things that got me teaching is realizing that it was being made way too difficult because people were not hanging it on these frameworks. Again, because that was my background. When I looked at the text directly, I was like, oh, this is the keys to the kingdom here. I don't need to listen to all this other stuff. Like, just look in these books. This one book, especially, this is where you see the whole thing laid out. But then I had to practice it. And then I saw that in practice, all of this was totally laid out, particularly, again, like rules for yogas and all this, when he gets into talk about Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and principles of houses and how all of these things come together. So that's a simple, powerful structure. It doesn't mean it's easy. Simple doesn't mean, oh, it's easy. Anybody can do it. Anybody can learn it. Anyone can learn it, just like you can learn any subject that you go to college for. And that was what I decided to do when I put together the certification course, 15 to 20 years ago, was that anybody can learn this instead of it being told like it was told to me. I mean, I was told, oh, you have a great chart for it, so you can do it. But most people can't. No, I was like, no, if this is explained properly, anybody can learn this. It's really you're failing that you can't teach it. You don't understand it well enough to teach it. So that's where I got busy and was like, I'm going to break this down so that this can be learned and understood.
Yeah.
And that the study of that, because it's right in the text as well, the study of that is what we all are supposed to know. We're supposed to know this because we have an intelligence, we have an intellect. And this limited mind thinks it has a clue about what's going on. Everybody thinks, oh no, this is what's going on. Even though we know it's really not right, we're like, no, this is what I think. And it's not correct. So the Brahmins, this is what they learned to understand this part of life. Of course, you can do yoga, Ayurveda. These are different things. These are practices that help you evolve through the body, help you keep in alignment with the seasons and all that. But to understand life and who you are and why you're here and how all of this divine architecture is working, Vedic astrology is that science. And it can be overwhelming and utterly complicated and bewildering until you hang it on these sensible structures. Then it's like remembering this lost knowledge that you had the whole time, but you just got sidetracked. And so that's what most people, well, I say most people, 99% of the people who go through the course wind up saying is like, wow, I get this, even though it's complex to wind up practicing astrology for a living or something, learning this, I can't believe I learned this, and that it's actually the universe makes sense and who I am makes sense within it.
Yeah. I also love the fact that you never practice astrology in isolation with or divorced from the other sciences, right? You were doing yoga, you were doing meditation, you have a guru. And I love listening to the stories of how you were sitting in satsang with Amma, and while you were studying astrology, it all started to also connect, because you're like, okay, yeah, what she's saying, which are divine principles, is actually seen through astrology. That is what she's talking about. And
but it's actually even just observing her, because when I was reading and really going into these practices of reading these texts, and especially putting together things like gunas and evolution, because again, we learn gunas in a very kind of mechanical way. Tamas, Rajas, Sattva, like there's, the Sattva is the good one. The other ones we're trying to avoid because it's through yoga training and whatnot. But I mean, even just realizing what I taught you years ago, which I then made sense to me, like, No, this is just evolution. This is just how consciousness evolves through body, mind, and spirit, and that the planets are just evolved, that those planetary forces are just evolving in us through this very physical tamasic way to an emotional way, rajasic, to an an integrated, enlightened way. I would have never thought of that. I mean, I didn't think of that. I thought of that. It was like a flash of lightning sitting in front of Amma, who is an embodiment of all of it. It was watching her and, hug people and stuff, just sitting there while these things were in my mind and watching the planets rise and fall. Because when you sit in front of a being like that, you're seeing the culmination of everything that's written in the text. You don't see it in the rest of us. You don't see me acting like that or the rest of us. This is the difference between us and a Satguru, because we wonder, why are we so compelled to sit here and watch this little lady hug people? Why do I care? Why am I so fascinated by this? Because it's a good question. And we all ask ourselves this. Why am I not exhausted, or why do I care? But it's because we don't get to see, our consciousness doesn't ever see the full embodiment of, again, we can say a person or whatever, but as I was studying astrology, it's of all the planets. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing the full power of the sun come out. And then the very next second, it's full Mercury. Then the next second, it's full Jupiter. And you never see this ever. And I realized that's what I'm seeing. And I'm like, that's what the astrology really is. It's not just this fatalistic, karmic, it's there to help you get the good things, avoid the bad things. There's going to be good times, bad times. It's not that. That's not actually what's happening. The chart is just like what I'm observing here. It's all just the rising and falling of the moods of the Divine Mother playing through us. And because our ego is a limiting adjunct, which again comes right from yoga training and Advaita Vedanta, our ego is in the way. That underneath it all, we are all of this spiritual divine potential with full capacity. But we have this illusion of separateness. Again, this comes right from yoga sutras. Yeah. And we're trying to break through. And the chart is showing the evolutionary potential and the specifics of it for each person. You have a specific evolutionary challenge based on your chart and ego and opportunity. It's both. It's not a judgment. Like, well, this is the good part, this is the bad part. It's all a process. Yeah. And so that was the thing. It was watching her. It wasn't even like she was saying anything. It was observing her. And this is always what they say to do around great gurus. Don't think so much about what they're saying and all. Observe, just be in their presence and observe. And particularly like with Amma, it's so easy because she's so active. Many gurus come out and they'll talk for an hour or so or 2 hours, and it's still a miraculous blessing. But she sits there. I know you've been there in her presence as well. She'll sit in front of you for 15 hours, longer than you can take it. And to just be able to watch is miraculous.
Yeah, yeah. So Sam, tell us more about how you have restructured the course, and why should somebody who has no knowledge about astrology take the course right now with you?
Well, I've changed it to it's the same system that you went through. I call it the P5 system, which I just coined it because I wanted to, again, I like structures and I like to take things that seem like, oh, he's teaching something. You break it down. And by the way, when you break it down, it also forces you or forces me to evaluate what I'm doing. Again, it's also practicing what I'm preaching. I'm not just teaching. I'm breaking my teaching down into a system. And so P5 means, what's the purpose, right? Like, what's the purpose of astrology or life? It's a good question, right? And they're really synonymous. You can hear my purpose here is that I understand it as this evolutionary process and this opening and returning back to our true nature. That's what astrology is for me. That's what life is for me. It's not just let's hang out and enjoy it. That's all part of it, but folded into that is we're evolving. That's the purpose. So that's the purpose of life and astrology, and they're synonymous, right? And now what are the principles? We've already talked about that. That's the second P, because this all works on principles. Like if you're doing biology, what's the purpose of doing it? Well, because you want to heal, you want to do this. Okay, now what are the principles that make all this work? You have all those bodily systems, or you can drill down into if it's working with cells, well, there are principles that make that work. And then you start to stack these principles. You identify the organelles and the this and the DNA. You identify what they are and how they work, and then you stack them. They stack on each other, which means the organelles interact with the this and the that, and these elements interact, the planets interact in the signs. All of these things then start to stack on each other, but you're still stacking principles. You're not just stacking anything. It's like you build something, right? And then once you stack the principles, it creates certain methods and certain, things like aspects. This is usually where people go. They go right to something and, oh, I know about aspects. You've memorized it, but you don't even know what it's based on. You don't understand, or like yogas. Okay, we get so far away from the fundamentals that by the time we try to interpret it, it's just a judgment. Again, this is why there's so much judgment in astrology, because they're disconnected from how they got there. It's like, oh, well, is it good or bad? And this is often what happens. So you need to prioritize and sequence things. That's the next P, priority and sequence. Everything is not as important as everything else. You don't just start from some arbitrary point.
Yeah.
In any context, reading the chart, but even if you're answering a question or if you're trying to interpret a certain thing, you have to start with that basic, that foundation, even in your interpretation. You don't start with the, is it good or bad? You start with, what is it? So priority and sequence is a universal principle. That's the fourth P. And then the fifth is practice with peers. This is why people should do it, because you can hear me say all of this and go, oh, that's great. Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Now I really learned something. You didn't really learn anything. You just heard me say it. And maybe you learned that it's important, but now to have it actually become knowledge, you need to practice it.
Yeah.
So it's built on the same principles. But what I'm doing in the relaunch is I've changed the name to the Live Your True Nature Vedic Astrology course. The Live Your True Nature is really what the course is about. Having gone through it, that's really the focal point, because we're here to live our true nature, not just our true nature as some discombobulated Atman spirit, but in this lifetime. The most that we're here to do is to actually live that authentic life as well. We're not trying to bypass it. We're not trying to negate it. When I say the ego, it's not an insult. It's part of our true nature, right? So when you learn astrology properly like this, like I've been teaching it this way, I could have called it that from the beginning, but it takes a while too, So realizing that this is really the thing that is happening is, so Live Your True Nature course, it's based on those principles. And I'm also adding a few things to it. I'm doing I'm reteaching the first module on Vedic principles in astrology. I'm going to be reteaching that again. So that's going to be brand new. The whole module is going to be brand new. Of course, the current module is still there. And that first module has been changing lives for 15 years. So it's not like there's anything wrong with it. But at some point, you just want to update things. It's going to include sacred astronomy, things with the zodiac, things that I think really need to be added to that first part of the course. So I'm going to be teaching that live on August 18th and 19th, 19th and 20th, if you're seeing this before. So those who register will be able to attend that live. If not, it'll be part of the course. I'm also doing an opening ceremony on, it's actually called Kalki Jayanti. I didn't know if it was a big deal or not. I even emailed you about it, but I selected this date. It's very auspicious muhurta to relaunch the whole program. And that's going to be on Tuesday, August 22nd. Very auspicious muhurta to relaunch it. I'm going to post the chart. I'm going to be talking more about this, depending on when people see this. But it's a major refocusing, because I think that it's time to also distinguish it from other programs and whatnot. A lot of great programs now. There's a lot of people teaching certification courses like this now, and I want to just relaunch it in that way. But just launch sounds so, but that's actually what it is. But it's just kind of rebranding, recommitting to what the core, the core vision statement or purpose and focal point is.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and that makes sense. You're right. it's not that different from what we had done, but actually calling it the process and naming it and labeling it that makes it clear for people.
Makes it clear for people. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I have been doing readings for quite some time, and I follow those principles. Every time I'm sitting in a reading, I am actually I'm focusing on what's the purpose of this reading, right? What are the principles? These are the principles I'm going to stick to, and they are astrological principles, but also ethical and moral principles. And Sam teaches that in his courses too. I will also prioritize what is important for the reading. I would not just hop my head off on something that is not ripe for
interesting to you. Hey, it takes a while. One real quick thing. One of the reasons to study, like even a course like this with someone like me, as I've been doing this a long time. So I've been doing a couple hundred readings a year for about 20 years, and I've made all the mistakes, and I can help you avoid them. And one of them is getting fascinated with a part of the chart and talking about it too much, and the person sitting there, oh yeah, great. So what about my relationship? And then you think, yeah, I should have been talking about that the whole time.
Yeah, not overemphasizing one thing over the other, and it's easy to get caught in that too, right? And as you start learning astrology, you'll start to learn terms like Shadbala and Avastas and this and that, and people get hung on to them, or Bhavad, something like they'll get hung on to one concept and they'll think that's, but how important it is in the priority of things, and how important it is for somebody you're doing that chart to. They will not even understand the word Shadbala thrown at them, right? So how do you not overemphasize certain things and bring it the priority of things? And these are the things I use in my everyday practice, even in my everyday practice of how I'm aligning myself in the morning in my meditation. And I'm not somebody who ties myself to the chart of the day, but I would always be feeling into how the energy is flowing. And if something feels a little dense, I would go back and look, oh yeah, I know exactly why this is feeling dense. And this is what is ripening for me. So this is the lesson I'm going to move through and lean into it and surrender into it. You can use that in your everyday life. But if you don't learn it correctly, if you don't learn the foundations and the frameworks correctly, everything seems like a mush, right? Everything seems equally important. You don't know what to focus on. You don't know what's ripening. You can't interpret it. You can't even articulate it. Your conversations about astrology, even, and you will realize this when you're talking to your peers and your folks about astrology, and it will all seem like something in a distance that does not connect. So these frameworks and principles are really, really important, and I'm glad you're doing that, Sam.
Yeah, and even like what you said, we only have so much time here, so much attention, so much to focus on, and the things that we put in our mind and that we learn, some of them are better than others. Let's be real. And it's not like we all have to be monks. I go and watch. I like entertainment at times. I watch the latest Star Trek. I have my guilty pleasures. I like to watch some sports. I like to play sports. We're here to enjoy life. We're here to consume and enjoy life and enjoy things. But there's also, we often overindulge like in things that aren't really teaching us anything, or particularly in this day and age, we need to be very careful with what we are studying and digesting and taking into our reality, because there's so much unreality now, particularly in the political world and the social world and all of these images that are coming at us. And I see this as a big challenge these days. And it's the other reason I really rebranded the course, because even those who 5 years ago would have been studying, many are now off. I mean, literally like studying this kind of stuff. Their worldviews now and what they're looking to for personal growth and this kind of thing. There used to be a lot more who would recognize these pure teachings and these serious teachings, and they would say, yes, this is something worth investing in, because learning this is going to benefit everything, because this is pure knowledge from the source. It's not some latest thing where, this side or that side is doing this. Yeah, that's the truth. the truth. We have this whole thing, the truther movement now, which is really nothing but just a lot of politics and stuff swirled together into some whatever it is. And again, that a lot of that same kind of thing years ago, before we got so misguided, frankly, around a lot of things, you would have that same group of people. A lot of them would be seeing this as truth and this kind of thing as the type of truth worth investing in. It even says right in the text, this is the stuff we need to learn and understand our place in the cosmos. And understanding this reframes and shapes all of that other stuff, because I'm into that stuff too. I'm curious about everything. I want to see all of it. I hear all of it. I see all of it, but it's all fits within this context. I don't lose myself in it. I don't lose myself in all of the narratives, because this is the foundation, and this is transcendent. This is transcendent knowledge. It's not just, oh, this is fun. This will be, this is an investment in your life knowledge. And by the way, even just as an investment, when people do get this course or any of my course, you have lifetime access to it. With the course itself, when you get, especially the full access, which most people get, you have monthly calls with me for a year. It usually goes about a year and a half, where we talk every month and all kinds of stuff. So people can check out the actual course information. But I see a lot of people getting very much sidetracked now into these other narratives. But this universal transcendent knowledge is always there, and it will enhance anything you're doing. Like you were doing it when you were doing your PhD. You didn't have to stop your PhD. So when people even tell me how busy they are, I'm like, look, I've had people in the midst of PhD programs and everything else, and this fits into their life, an hour a week or so, and in 6 months, you'll be a great astrologer.
Yeah. To that, before we close, maybe you can, because you have so many students, maybe you can talk about the success stories, maybe a couple who have really taken the teachings and like moved on and have really stuck to the basics and are doing readings and working with astrology in an authentic way. And
well, definitely you're definitely one of the big success stories. You're now teaching at conferences and things like that. You started, you had a curiosity, and then just sort of took a chance to because I also make it easy. I'm like, just try it. I mean, there's a guarantee, there's a money back guarantee, quote, to put it that way in business terms. By the way, I learned how to do those things because I also invested years ago when I was just kind of trying to make a living and scraping by and actually doing well. I actually got, quite far just on my own skills, but I also knew that I wanted to be very, not just successful so I could make a lot of money, but I wanted more impact. I wanted this to really reach more people. So I invested in some business courses. So I learned how to actually make courses that people will want, and how people will want to invest. And one of the things is you give them the guarantee. It's called reversing the pressure. It's like no risk. People can just try it. And so people like you just tried it. And there's been many others that people know. Many started from just the very beginning and didn't really understand they had no formal training whatsoever in learning astrology, but they just plugged in, went through the system, and trusted the process. And I also know what happens is once people get into it and they start learning it, it's going to shift their perspective, and they're not going to want their money back. This is also a good guarantee. This is why I can make the guarantee, because I know what they're going to get, and I know it's in short supply in this world. So I encourage people to not think that you have to be, some sophisticated person who has studied forever. But by the way, there's also been people that had been studying for 5 to 10 years, gathering information, and they weren't able to really make much sense of it until they started studying in the course, because it organized all that information for them.
Yeah, that organization and the framework is really important.
And you can imagine people who have been gathering data forever and they know it already. Again, this is it's a big illusion that people often really overestimate how much they know or how useful it is with astrology. Again, we don't do that in other areas. You wouldn't go to someone who has been a doctor for 20 years, literally, like making a living at it, training people, working in a hospital, doing this for 20 years, and say, oh yeah, I'm also a doctor, because you've been gathering information from the internet, or you've been watching videos. Oh yeah, I get it. But you wouldn't do that, because we have respect for that profession. We wouldn't think we're a doctor because we've been exposed to it for 15 years or 10 years or 5 years. We wouldn't think that. But people think that about astrology. They think because they've been exposed to it and they know about their chart and they can put together some sentences, that it's somehow the same ballpark as me and you. No, it's not. We've gone through a whole PhD in it and then practice. So it's not unattainable to anyone. But it also should be respected and taken seriously. And if you're not learning it correctly, you're not only not learning astrology correctly, but you're probably not plugged in to the truthful framework of your existence. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to be kind and generous with the people in your life that you have problems with, mm-hmm. all the difficulties. That allows you to understand them on a higher level and have tolerance really for everything, including weird conspiracies or weird other things, or the people that drive you nuts. You can have a lot more compassion when you have this larger perspective.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you, Sam. I think we have here something that is really valuable that you're bringing to the table, and I would encourage everybody who is serious about learning astrology, at least the frameworks correctly, because once you know the frameworks, you can fly, you can do whatever you want to. Learn it correctly, and yeah, what Sam has created here is very valuable. So sign up for his course. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. It's an honor to spend this time with you, and to have you as a success story is also just a great blessing, considering where you've been, what you've done with your life, as an example for people, whether they're Indian or American or whatever they are. You're a shining example of the best I've done.
Thank you, Sam.